Good afternoon, everybody. Shh. It's a big secret. Well, it's not a secret anymore. Targeted people across the nation, across the world, are speaking out against these atrocities. And I'm going to continue reading the book that you're all enjoying as much as I am, Global Thuggery Insights on Control by Terror, Torture, Targeting American Citizens. Now, it says American citizens, and he's speaking from an American's perspective, but this is happening worldwide. Mostly in the UK and Australia and in Canada. My rooster's in the background. So anyway, this is Lorraine Alternative Homesteading. Before I start part 2, the puzzle, number 23, Enigma, do you have a family? Please hit the thumbs up. Welcome newcomers. Thank you for subscribing. Remember to hit the notifications bell so that you're notified when I upload a new video. I'm having a lot of computer, or I should say laptop difficulty because I am running out of hard drive space. So I've been spending a lot of time deleting stuff, and I have a little backup hard drive and I can't even get it to work because I don't even have enough room to load up the software and stuff. So that's why I haven't gone live, which I wanted to do. I'm just having some difficulty here. I'll probably end up having to buy another laptop unless I can get some additional space on this one. But anyway, I hope everybody's having a good day. We're going to continue on with part 2. It's entitled The Puzzle Enigma. Do you have a family? 9 p.m. baby. Not her real name, of course. Asleep at my feet. No audible sound in the house, yet the orchestra from hell was repeating a 3 or 4 measure bass line with several rhythm-changed musicians hammering away on partially functional synthesizers. In the background was the screechy high-frequency whine, not ordinary tinnitus, and a deliberate off-rhythm bass drum, enough to be disturbing, at least. I heard none of it consciously as I wrote a note to my wife who was reading in another room. My note stated, "This is the quote-unquote can of worms that we hoped never to open. The adversaries we face may be considerably greater than just a couple or so covert American spy groups. I've done the math. And this discovery clearly pushes the time frame back decades further. Don't say anything. I'll try to get it all down in the morning." My note stated, expressionless. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't say anything. I'll try to get it all down in the morning. Expressionless, she handed me the note back. She didn't look the least perturbed. I went to bed early, but I was hours from sleep wondering if they knew what I was doing and what reprisals might be in store. By 1 a.m., my mind kept insisting there would be no reprisals. I fell asleep thinking maybe they really can't follow my thoughts using remote neural monitoring. He wrote RNM. 2.5 hours later, my heavy, lamb-like sleep was interrupted by a calm, soft female voice whispering, "I got up to take baby out, but we can't get out. There's a tree in front of the door." For a moment, I wondered if this could be just another induced dream, but the voice was insistent, repeating that a tree was blocking the door. Reluctantly, I got up and put on my robe. I was visualizing a large bush or small sapling. No such luck. In front of the door was something that, at 3 or 4 in the morning, looked like a giant redwood. The door was thoroughly blocked. I opened the double-sized garage door, and there was just enough space to get the dog out. As I went inside to get dressed, a sharp pain shot through my upper jaw and intensified during the next few minutes. Maybe if I have a few aspirin and a bite to eat, it will go away, I thought. Several hours later, the chainsaw guys were busy with removal. Oh, it sounds like it sounds like Kentucky. It was only then that we could see the damage that one tree can do. 2 vehicles appeared to be at total losses, and a third was looking as if it had been through a heavy, ruinous hailstorm. The carport had extensive damage, and the roof of the house was also damaged, all with no wind, no storm, no dead tree. Oh, well, this is sounding vaguely familiar, guys. No wind, no storm, no dead tree. By mid-morning, the tooth pain was close to unbearable. About 6 years prior, I had mocked a TI who talked about the severe pain that remote directed energy can create. If it hasn't happened to you, it's very hard to believe. My resolve not to visit medical practitioners was overridden by dental pain. That afternoon, we visited 5 local dentist offices. They were all closed. By coincidence, it was the first day of the almost total lockdown. Hey guys, you seeing the wiggle on my phone? Don't you just love the evidence? Dental toolkits on the internet cost about $150. Immediately we ordered one. We do our own extraction. After 4,320 estimated minutes of excruciating tooth pain, a victim is willing to take a more creative approach. Most every one of the 4,320 minutes felt like an eternity. TIs are their first wave. But like the isolation and the police state lockdowns, the next waves are for everyone. Fortunately, once I had ordered the dental tools, the pain slowly disappeared. Oh, how coincidental. A totally healthy tree falling without even the slightest breeze cost a little over $20,000 for repairs to 3 vehicles and the house, but insurance paid for a good bit of the cost. Do you have a family? What I had assimilated only minutes prior to my handling the note to my spouse, as I mentioned above, was a desktop, a side table, and a bookshelf with news articles, chapters, and books, which had not struck me as relevant to my own situation earlier. Suddenly I realized that what I was seeing suggested a unified whole. The literature stared back at me. There seemed to be a common denominator or a set of factors that, taken together, could be instrumental in devastating an entire nation. Factors including money, media, military, the medical establishment, education, and exclusivity, to mention just a few. My not being an intelligence insider has necessitated relying more on solid research from others, research that parallels and complements much of what we have experienced firsthand. Research triggers memories. Works by numerous writer-researchers managed to trigger personal memories and associations. Suddenly, I was looking back to early childhood and even birth. Childhood to preteens, high school and college, my first professional work assignments, and the last one. I thought of the never-ending setups. I thought of the honey traps, the strings of vehicle breakdowns. I recall tragic family dismemberments, too, within a very short time frame. A family member's attempted suicide. Not many are as strong as writer Gloria Naylor. I recall the family member complaining about being watched every day. And the family member who thought she saw medical malpractice as a reason for her sibling's death at age 42. Well, I'm going to tell you folks that 42 astrologically is considered to be the Uranus opposition. Uranus is sudden events, and it's when Uranus transits the zodiac to meet up with your natal Uranus. Whatever area of life, the house in which your natal Uranus resides at the time of the Uranus opposition, will create significant events. If it crosses your 7th house, you will likely get a divorce, maybe find somebody else, pick up and leave, get into an unusual kind of relationship. This person, sibling's death at age 42. It may have been in the 3rd house, 4th house of home, 3rd house, siblings, house of Gemini. There are many more such incidents. enough to fill a book, which is why I will pursue that option. Though it will not be an altogether pleasant journey down memory lane, a few extremely unlikely mishaps or catastrophes leaves a room for doubt. Strings of coincidences, believable or not, cannot be taken lightly. Do you have a family? Me? Yes, but a small one that has become smaller as strange incidents have occurred. The question is actually a line from the near documentary To Kill the Messenger, and it suggests that the thugs that seem to have taken control of America and much of the world use the barbaric, dark age tactic of destroying the entire bloodline of one suspected to be an enemy or one useless to the controller's ends. And I underscore this. So I'm going to read it again. The thugs that seem to have taken control of America and much of the world use the barbaric, dark age tactic of destroying the entire bloodline of one suspected to be an enemy or one useless to the controller's ends. And until a few days before our last tree fell, the day the lockdown began, I had hardly thought about the 42-year-old relative's demise. He had, against his siblings' warning, joined a conservative organization. I tend to recall the John Birch Society, which a few people might see as a bit extreme. I don't know. But even in my earlier days, I couldn't quite see Birch as much of a threat. What Birch saw as a threat was a plutocratic sort of communism. And everyone I knew hated commies. At least till they got to college. Our media and other institutions in our society has taught us to loathe and detest commies very well. An older relative, the siblings of the relative who died at the age of 42, was quite vocal about hating the Fed and New York bankers. Also on the list were medical doctors. More precisely, the ones who were treating the 42-year-old sibling she had watched for weeks, noting many details. The 60s, an age of innocence? I first heard about all of this at the age of 21. It was the mid-60s, a time when most Americans, including myself, thought the medical profession was going to keep us golfing and tennising until we were at least 105 or 110. American longevity is now less than that of many third world nations. And yeah, that is true. That's unfortunate. It's decreasing. During the 60s, we heard little to nothing about medical malpractice, schools for assassins, false flags, the military police state, or the surveillance state. Our naivete was boundless. The CIA, FBI, and medical professionals were doing a great job, we thought. Today, I am reminded of a Consumer Reports article from August 2012 entitled, "How Safe is Your Hospital?" Another, Rosemary Gibson, delved into the question saying, "There is an epidemic of healthcare harm. More than 2.25 million Americans will probably become unalive, I'll say, from medical malpractice in this decade. Too many articles for me to keep up with have similar reports. More than 2.25 million. Those numbers might indicate the need for a quote-unquote lockdown or lockout. Let no one enter dangerous medical facilities." And he said, see the note below. And the note below is, it's a 2017 account of their outrageous medical system can be found in Elizabeth Rosenthal's An American Sickness, which is a book. She's a Harvard MD. Rosenthal is outraged that good health care in America is not affordable to most people. She says monstrous profit is driving medicine. The descriptor outrageous is fitting. It's fitting enough to be used on the inside cover, the epilogue, and twice by the reviewers on the back cover. If readers are not outraged by absurdly high medical costs for often less than mediocre treatment, they will want to carefully read the back of the cover of CAHTs. Are you a targeted individual? It is a 60-page, nicely illustrated, ideal TI handbook. And I will say CAHT is Citizens Against Harmful Technology. It mentions an array of medical enslavement methods. The final paragraph begins, TIs are slaves to the electronic implants, V2K, and neural monitoring. The bottom line for this slavery is that they own your life, every move, every word, every thought, owned by thugs who may likely not be operating in your better interest. Yes, we should be outraged, disgusted, and even angered. But recall what anger can do to the very ones who harbor these emotions. And there's a book called Anger Kills by Dr. Williams. Only minutes ago I mentioned a separate volume for relevant events. In this rewrite, however, I am making room for a few pages that illustrate far more than a jumble of coincidences of super bad luck. In addition, they need to be documented here and now. Strings of coincidence? A few months ago, another family member was pulling out of his driveway when he was solidly hit by a large car operated by a doctor. Coincidence? They do occur, infrequently. The relative had never had a wreck before that. Sometime later, in another vehicle, he was driven into a bridge rail by a driver whose car was several feet into his narrow lane. It's called an attempted side swipe and seems to occur frequently to targeted individuals. It's called an attempted side swipe. Yeah, I've heard this several times. At this time in America, most of us were light years from understanding how unchecked, unsupervised coverts can destroy unwitting citizens and their own country. The 1970s revelations on MKUltra and COINTELPRO may have done little in alerting the bulk of American citizenry. Shortly, this relative and his family moved, and within a matter of months, he lost fingers on his right hand while at work. He was a knowledgeable supervisor who was helping a coworker who was behind in his work, when a cutting machine suddenly went into motion, like all by itself, and severed all but the smallest finger. A safety device that was supposed to stop the machine had been removed. You hear that? It's called sabotage. Had been removed. This is like attempted murder. It's premeditated. That's what the word I'm looking for. It's premeditated. Confusion, or at the hospital, he told the personnel that he had serious allergies to opiates. However, opiates were administered. Instantly, he almost died. Several months later, he suffered a severe heart attack and another one shortly thereafter. This relative had always been physically sturdy and strong, but never overweight. His driving record was impeccable, accident and ticket-free, until the odd accident in his driveway. I would say, too, that he lived as he drove, careful, alert, and sensible. He died from a third heart attack at the age of 71, and we all thought, quote-unquote, natural death. I will never use that expression again without checking and rechecking surrounding details carefully. Covert assassins, however, are themselves quite careful. Evidence is rarely obvious, but even if it were, do the coverts control the legal system too? Recall what Colonel Prouty has said. The CIA and its allies control all. That's a quote. Where were the covert gang stalkers during the 50s and the 60s? As a child, a teen, and a young man, I had no idea what MKUltra or COINTELPRO were already doing their work, dastardly, dark works, and that within a couple of decades their operatives could direct voices to our minds telling us thousands of times a day to hate the people we love, including family, especially family. Do you have a family? He asks again. To even think about an elderly family member's plight in the 1990s and later is distressing. We could do little for her because we were experiencing all too similar problems. Bouts of rage, mood swings, increasing isolation, watchers and followers, highly suspicious accidents, quote unquote, and marital problems leading to divorce papers being served after 33 years of excellent marriage. Oh, goodness, guys. Did you hear what I just said? Divorce papers being served after 33 years of excellent marriage. Such a coincidence. That number just keeps popping up. These incidences barely scratch the surface of what was transpiring, but they are enough to indicate that to those even slightly familiar with government-sponsored MKUltra COINTELPRO type programs that we had somehow become targets of organized gang stalking. My family, neighbors, friends, and I were ignorant that governments, even the worst of the worst, could do such things. We might ponder whether a seemingly discriminatory comment could lead to subjecting a person to a diet of terror, torture, and eventual termination. We need only talk with TIs who have no idea why they're targeted. Many think their targeting results from attending a peace meeting, writing a letter to the editor, or ignoring a covert operative's sexually inviting gesture. There are no safe havens. Innumerable threats, made both publicly and privately to me and my family members, took their toll. I retired early and we moved to the Northeast. Little did we ever expect at that time that there is nowhere in the world safe from thug assassin operatives. In fact, we never considered that our government might be looking at us. Truly, it is important to add that neither I nor the public will ever know the full extent of the entire ordeal. Clandestine thugs spy on us. They cruise into our brains via microwave frequencies. They collect our memories, our fears, our likes, our dislikes, information that can be used to control us or to destroy us. Maybe awareness of the danger helps the victim. Programming. Author Gloria Naylor illustrates how a few thousand or million programming directives using electronic weapons may turn anyone into anything. Commit suicide, bitch. Oh, can I say that on YouTube? But I'm reading it. Those are not my words. Was the unrelenting message Naylor's fictional Gloria received daily. Any assailant who surveils potential victims and stores particulars of their lives for some nefarious purpose, tormenting them using out-of-context and twisted facts to destroy their reputations, or electrochemical and psyop mind control to eventually destroy their lives, should be held accountable. Surveillance of and information gathering on U.S. citizens are carried out daily by one or more of our many intelligence services. Yeah, our tax dollars hard at work. This writer hopes that none of the readers here will have to confront covert agencies. However, victims will probably not even know where incidents are coming from. Am I besieged by one of the ultra-powerful agencies, or 3 of them, or 12, or how many? Since 2013, we have been documenting the bizarre incidents we feel part of our targeting by the OGGS program. Thousands of them. Incidents mentioned in this essay, taken alone, are hardly convincing to dubious non-TIs. Truly, I would have been so very skeptical just 7 years ago. I would have been indignant at the suggestion that some group was using microwaves or LSD to control my behavior, or that spy groups were watching us 24/7, reading our every thought. About 10 years ago, I turned off my computer news site after reading a torture account. Torture? Didn't our history professors inform us that torture was a Dark Ages phenomenon? Perhaps I should have given the article more thought. For when there's little or no government transparency, the darkest of ages infiltrates with impunity. Do you have a family? The question was posed to journalist Gary Webb, who exposed government agency drug trafficking in America. Kill the Messenger, a film based on Webb's experiences, reveals the merciless harassment by covert agencies he endured. Webb's supposed suicide is questionable, since he was shot twice in the head. Oh, well, come on, guys. There are 2 Kill the Messenger films, but the near documentary, quote unquote, referenced here stars Jeremy Renner and is directed by Michael Cuesta, Cuesta. My media story and analysis, again. They kept me on the front pages of major media for 2 years, 1994 to 1996. But why? The several quotes and praise for Dr. Cherubini on the back cover are a minute iceberg tip of the media picture almost a quarter century before this writing. Indeed, journalists were everywhere. My office, the board meetings, the phone. I opted out of many interviews and appearances, as well as an astounding stipend for my story in a major documentary's maker's film of my crusade against apartheid in American schools. Let the world know, somehow. News crews were exceptional, courteous, balanced, insightful, and truthful. Then I was filled with admiration. By 2002 and 2003, my respect had dwindled. By 2013, it had plummeted even more. We had discovered we were being followed, harassed, and terrorized by organized gang stalkers. We determined to let the world know about a situation as illegal as apartheid in the schools. We organized our notes and spent several days on the phones calling the media and humanitarian groups. No one was in. We left our phone numbers, names, and brief messages. There were 3 callbacks. PETA, which is People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, the SPCA, and America's oldest periodical. We did not give up. We visited politicians' offices, government offices, law enforcement offices, and smaller media from New England to Florida. Again, the lack of interest in the issue was mind-boggling. Even today, it's hard to believe that members of government entities and the Fourth Estate, who should be safeguarding democracy, are instead allowing it to be usurped, thus putting every American at risk. Once again, why the avalanche of media interest in 1994 and 1906, but then in 2013, not a second's worth of concern about a program as deadly and inhumane as MK Ultra COINTELPRO type organized gang stalking? Number 24, joining the gang. We're ganging up on Benny, if you want to join in. He'll be coming out in a few minutes, probably. The toughest and one of the biggest kids on the block yelled softly to me as I came out of my house. Yeah, I'll join in. I was elated that this tough older kid wanted me to help out. What does ganging up mean? I mean, what do you do? George did not have the time for a smaller kid's dumb questions. Just go wait with the gang down the street. Indeed, a compact circle of some 10 or 12 kids had already formed. I joined them a little nervously. They all seemed quiet and a bit nervous as well. I looked up the street wondering where George had gone. I sensed this group needed a leader, and I was not going to show my ignorance to these kids by asking what ganging up was. The street was pure New England, 40 miles from Boston. Giant maples with some leaves already yellow lined a street with large, well-built homes. Every father had a job, and every mother stayed at home with their children, cooking and doing housework. Our family went many places, different neighborhoods, towns, and even states. We never saw a poverty-stricken person. Not one kid in my school or anywhere on the long walk to my school seemed to suffer from any malady. Safety and caution were not words in our vocabulary. I would not see a police car or even a street cop for many years. Of course, this was several years before President Eisenhower warned us of a military-industrial complex and before President Kennedy was assassinated by the same complex, according to many writers researching the tragedy. Those are not my words, YouTube. I didn't say there. I'm reading a book. I'm reading a book. We have to teach Benny a lesson. We really have to teach Benny a lesson today, you know, one of the bigger kids in the circle hissed. His father runs that shop that sells cheap junk for high prices over on West Street. They cheated us out of money, too. And I'll tell you something else. I heard that I know is true. All of them walk around the house naked. I suddenly caught myself hating Benny. He had lived there a year, and he hardly ever came out to play, and Lonnie, the big kid, knew about things because he was George's best friend. Here comes George now, said Lonnie, with 3 more men. I looked and saw George with 3 quote-unquote men. They were about my own age, 7 or 8. George took command several car lengths before his arrival with the additional gang support. Okay, men. For any of you who don't know what to do when you gang up on somebody, his eyes found me. We get in this big circle around the dirty commie. Yeah, the whole family is communist. They go naked around the house. And they have not been to church since they moved here. But anyway, we get in a circle. Then one of us breaks in and hits Benny. And then it goes back in the circle. And the next one goes in and punches hard. And every man gets a punch. And then we start over again. You understand? All heads were nodding. We were ready for a commie victim. We didn't have to wait long. In several minutes, Benny appeared on his front steps. George went fast, yelling over to Benny, "Come here, Benny. We want you to be part of this new game." Benny hesitated. We watched in anticipation. I talked to him several times and thought he was a pretty good guy, smart for his age and friendly, even though he was the shortest, skinniest kid on the block and wore huge black-rimmed glasses that were too big for his face. A huge shock of black hair complemented his glasses, as did the black dress slacks he always wore with a long-sleeve white shirt. He walked over, obviously trying not to look tentative. George approached him in a friendly manner, too friendly, and explained to Benny that Benny could be in the middle of the circle, while we would try to, quote-unquote, get him. The circle was formed before George finished speaking, and before Benny could decide whether he wanted to play or not. George yelled, "Okay, men, I'll go first." He hit Benny in the chest, and Benny reeled like a boxer who had just received a direct blow. I mean, remember, this is a skinny kid. Suddenly I felt terrible. I didn't like this game. Neither did another onlooker. Benny's mother was instantly on the front steps. Her hair, the color of Benny's, swirled around her face as she descended on the front stoop, screaming and swinging a large broom. Men, small kids and gang members were running in all directions. I watched her rescue Benny and loved her for saving him. She was a beautiful person. Benny never came out to play again. I don't recall any of us playing in the streets or yards again. Grandmother was sitting on our porch 2 houses away from Benny's when I got home. I sat in the opposite chair and asked her, "Did you see us gang up on Benny?" She said nothing. Her face was expressionless. You know, they might be commies. And they go around the house, I mean, they never go to church. And they are Jews, I blurted out. Grandmother remained quiet for too many seconds. I grew uneasy. Had I done something wrong? "You may not like me when I tell you this," she said, her voice almost a whisper. She paused, and I squirmed, wondering what horrible thing she was going to say. "I'm part Jewish," she finally said. "My father was a Jew." I was quiet for a few moments. "I still like you," I said, not aware that she was rescuing me from acquiescing to the gang mentality. So can gang behavior destroy an entire society? This writer believes that criminal government gangs, quote unquote, have already ruined much of what was good in America. Could the caring and brave supermoms around the world help stop fascist tyranny? In 1952, probably. In the age of the microwave mind control and government gang stalking, maybe not. But I like to think, yes. Tick tock, 90 years. Number 25. And you guys have a very important part in this song, said our music teacher. When the girls sing 90 years without slumbering, you guys all say tick tock, tick tock. Very important part, boys. But even in 6th grade during the 50s, I could spot sexism. The girls had to learn all these verses of grandfather's clock, and we guys got off with just a few tick-tocks. Important tick-tocks, perhaps, but a sort of unfair to the girls. Likely, similar scenarios are the reason that so many guys end up as rap stars or reciting poetry. Girls have been trained to do the more melodic parts, possibly dating back to earlier times when 90% or so of the harpists were women. Grandfather's age of 90 caught my attention once again, just as it did in the mid-50s. Back then, we kids had no doubt that by the time we were 90, American longevity would have increased to well over 100 years, maybe 110 or 15 at least. This was the USA, right? Our longevity was going up fast, while we heard that of China, Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and such were going down fast. In 20 years, we thought they could be lucky to live through the 6th grade. But something was happening that we did not understand. It seems that while Americans were scared senseless about a commie takeover, the time and money that should have been spent on people and infrastructure was being spent on bombs and other instruments of destruction. Today, China's longevity is higher than that of the United States, even though the U.S. spends more on health care than any other country. Since the 1950s, China has made astounding longevity progress. The less populated country of Singapore, 6 million, needs a closer look. This country was clearly a third world nation only a few decades ago by most standards. Yet, in the past decade or so, the longevity of Singapore citizens has consistently been in the top 2 or 3 nations. How can this happen? I did some light research, and the conclusion was most often good leadership with leaders that actually cared about the health and well-being of their citizens. Most research and private discussion about America's downhill trajectory points to very poor leadership and near total disregard for citizens' well-beings, including a long and healthful life. One wonders if our leaders have formulated a new American dream. The dream that has 80, 90, 95% of the population suddenly gone, so that the remaining few can own a godzillion acres instead of just zillions. They could purchase entire nations in Africa, Central America, or Asia rather than partial nations, and their corporations could quickly finish the transition to robotic slave labor. How can this be? How can we allow several men to amass more wealth than the entire bottom 50%, which is 160 million Americans of our population? How can we consistently have a prison population percentage that defies imagination? Our military spending that is astronomical compared to that of the entire world. Not to mention devious covert programs of assassination, torture, terror, like organized quote-unquote gang stalking, COINTELPRO, and the multitude of others that make one wonder if indeed our nation has become a perp society and an assassination nation. Self-aggrandizing government leaders may well be the greatest threat to the greatest number of world citizens. Tick-tock, time to wake up before the clock stops. Never to go again. Number 26, The Visitation. I was playing around in the front workshop when my grandpa was working, and I saw a neighbor cross his backyard and then ours, and he headed towards the shop. The neighbor was an oddity, very tall and very thin looking, even thinner in his dark suit. He said he needed to see my grandfather, so I opened the door to the shop, and he followed inside. I was about 12 at the time, and I was thinking it nice that the neighbor was sort of friendly. The fairly small book the neighbor carried turned out to be a Bible. Appropriate, I thought, since it was Sunday. Far from the end of the shop, I could tell he was reading the Bible to Grandpa, but mostly I noticed how the neighbor made Grandpa, who was shorter than I was, look like a midget. As the neighbor kept reading from his Bible, his voice became louder and more strident. Grandpa turned back to his project and never looked at the neighbor again, even though by then the man was screaming and jabbing bony fingers at the pages of his Bible. In another minute or so, he tore out of the shop, his head pitched forward in his long, bony neck. I asked Grandpa what the guy had wanted and learned that the neighbor did not like for anyone to work on Sundays. That made sense for me, because I suspected that Grandpa was a workaholic. One from a small French-Canadian village. The visit was never mentioned again, and within months, the neighbor was gone. And the small framed house he had lived in was taken down. I totally forgot about the incident until something made me recall it some 60 years later in 2018. What could happen to Grandfather, or anyone else for that matter, who had the audacity to ignore the status quo? In 2018, the nature was rife with community-based agents, quote unquote, or CBAs, covert mercenary and vigilante types. The late Ronnie Kildee, a victim of such covert evil herself, had presented an overview of the harassment methods used by COINTELPRO-type gang stalkers. It consists of about 25 pages showing the operations that mercenary types do daily on a large scale. And just so you know, folks, I read that out loud over the summertime. You can search for Dr. Kildee on my homepage. Grandfather is no longer alive, but I am glad that he enjoyed a long and happy life, though through most of the 20th century. I strongly suspect that with his penchant for freedom, if he were alive today, he would ignore the status quo, and even work against it if it challenges our rights and freedoms as citizens. Today, this writer firmly believes the Bible thumper, or any other connected person, could turn in Grandfather's name so he could be tortured and slowly murdered by those who enjoy the thrill and power of torture and murder. Number 27, the history professor. The history instructor was good. Many of the class of 40 sophomores agreed. Well, 179 good days, and just one day left us, at least me, in some state of confusion. He really did hate commies. 41 of us were totally unified in our hatred of communists. But then, he had about 10 years of practice hiding from atomic commie bombs by ducking under desks, or running to the safety of inside hallways and blocking the atomic force by putting arms over heads. After all, he had seen pictures of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Plus, this teacher knew things he did not. Facts not even mentioned in our history books. I remember nothing from the 179 good old days, but oddly, I vividly recall that one day the professor became a teaching dynamo. Someone had commented on commie spies who were sneaking into South America. Soon, the entire world would be infested with commies, the class moaned. There wasn't a second hesitation. In several steps, our instructor was at the roll-down map of the world, pointing to some foreign country. We have secret, covert spy operations here. And here. He moved his pointer closer to RUSSIA. and further down here, and all this entire continent over here and here. By then, he was wrapping the pointer forcefully against the map time and again. The map held up well, but he didn't. He didn't stop. I was having trouble believing we could have all that many covert forces in the world. Chaos and confusion. Finally, the assault on the map ended, and he stood quietly and allowed a hint of impish grin, the same grin as when he'd asked Alfred if he were still dating so-and-so. And in every one of these countries, our men are spreading what we call chaos and confusion. His grin widened. Chaos, confusion? We, sophomoric types, thought we knew what those terms meant. Confusion, as in how to do algebra after being out sick for a few days. Chaos is when live chickens were thrown from an auditorium balcony during a pep rally. Oh yeah, we were the chickens. But our professor redefined the terms that day, giving us more vivid imagery about chaos and confusion than we might have ever imagined. In fact, I thought then that chaos and confusion might more accurately be termed death and destruction. Number 28. Vanilla. Vanilla, I'll call her. Would stop by the custard stand when I worked almost every day, always ordering a large vanilla shake. I started adding extra custard. She was really thin, sort of cute too. The custard stand closed for the winter and my family moved to another town, 10 miles away from the custard shop, but 4 years later I met Vanilla again not far from where the shop had been. She looked more than 4 years older then, and I thought she might be older than I. She wore no big smile now, and she was still thin. With an almost sad face, she said, "I always dreamed you would save me." Unquote. Rescue you? From what? I asked, a bit surprised. She swept her hand from one side to the other, her eyes following the arc. Quote, "This, all of this," unquote. I looked at the landscape surrounding us, maybe for the first time. I did want to rescue her. But there was a draft board looming on the horizon, and most of us were not sure we could save ourselves. So I'm going to end here. Men and women, boys and girls, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that segment of Global Thuggery Insights on Control by Terror, Torture, Targeting American Citizens by Corkin Cherubini. I will read more of it. I've got to get my chickens into bed now. And please hit the thumbs up. We look forward to your questions and comments down below. And I'm going to sign off for now.